Kubrick's films have fabulous camera movements. When you think of 2001, you think of slow pans. When you think of Barry Lyndon, you think of zooms.
Zooms is something that was used very stylistically a lot in the early, in the 60s and 70s. But Kubrick uses it in a way in both The Shining and in Barry Lyndon in ways that reveal things to you over a course of time.
I know that the more technological knowledge the director has, the better filmmaker he becomes, simply because he understands the emotional aspect of image size.
I think a sense of environment and place was important to him, and the wide lenses always included where the person was, as opposed to what you see in a lot of movies where it's sort of floating heads, talking heads, where everything is blurred around. When you put a long lens on and do what we call a close-up, it tends to blur everything else around you, and it's just kind of a talking head. That's one thing. The second thing was the movement, the sense of movement through those hallways. That's increased like crazy with a wide lens. You get the sense of enormous movement. And somebody coming at you, or a strike at you, or a move toward you or away from you is exaggerated enormously in a wide lens.
So if you talk about Kubrick, he exactly knows what the lens will give him. A very conventional way of creating a horror in the close-up would be to employ long lens, where you really don't know where the horror comes from. What Kubrick did in Shining, he employed the opposite. He employed 17, 14 millimeters, where you see everything and you don't know where the danger comes from, but you can see the space it may come from. Mom? And that's scarier to me than the conventional way of conveying the horror genre.
Even though he didn't operate all the time on his films, certainly handheld camera things he would operate on because he had a real understanding of what he wanted to do, specific to the way he wanted to move the camera.
Kubrick always moved the camera. It's almost like the Steadicam was invented for Stanley.
He lit like a lot of great artists. He had that kind of an eye. He went all the way through the complexities and back to something terribly simple. He used real lights, screw a light bulb in and turn it on and shoot.
That's one of the great things about having a director who is also a photographer. Every one of Kubrick's cinematographers had said that if he wasn't a director, he'd be the world's greatest cinematographer.
He gave me a Nikon with 3 lenses and a package of Tri-X film and a bunch of instructions. The first one was never use a flash. He was consumed with visuals. He was really a photographer. That's what he did, He saw you in relationship to your surroundings. That's what spoke to him. It just meant more, I think, to him, those elements in the composition. Stanley had his own Stanley Kubrick technique.
Because he was so strong on imagery, he just loved the fact his creative team, his lighting guys and the set designer, everybody understood what was going on and why. The costumes and the hair and the makeup worked together. So I worked very closely, for instance, with Milena.
It's interesting to look at Stanley because from the way he chose the shots in Clockwork Orange was totally different from the way he shot The Shining. And it was fascinating how, in Barry Lyndon, he had special lenses and the candles. And he taught me how, explain, because he liked to explain things. He was always very kind and gentle whenever you ask him certain questions. I asked him once about the very wide angle lens he was using in Clockwork Orange, 9.8, and he told me how it should be used.
He would take ideas from anybody. He was voracious for people's views on things, whoever they were. He would listen to what people had to say, and he would take what he thought was right.
The responsibility of an artist is to raise questions, not to provide answers. It's to hold a mirror up to society. And Kubrick is a great artist, perhaps one of the greatest that the cinema ever had. His responsibility is to reflect the society back upon itself as he sees it, and not to offer cure-alls or suggestions for how to improve our daily lives.
He was not a predictable filmmaker. and his understanding of the craft, his understanding of how you tell stories using the visual medium are really unsurpassed.
Every single story somehow was so mysterious in the way the story was told. It so kept you guessing, how's this going to turn out? What's going to happen next? I can't even imagine. And the genius of Stanley is you can look at a movie of his 15 times and you'll still give up and you'll be surprised all over again. And I don't know anybody else who possesses that kind of magic.
I'm really, really, really sorry that Stanley died. That a great deal of the joy I expected in the movie viewing end of things for the rest of my life has disappeared in a flash because he won't make those movies that I love to see. Besides losing him as a friend and a mentor, I'm really sorry as just a film goer that he's not doing this anymore.
He was a great friend, a fund of monumental knowledge, a mind-opening person. If you just think of the stuff he did, and he just saw it out in front of him and approached it with wildly high intelligence.
To say he was a great craftsman is to seriously understate something. Stanley didn't change much. I mean, his acceptance speech about Icarus at the Directors Guild, I mean, nothing could be more perfect. The myth of Icarus, flying too high for success. He says, and people always took that as a moral tale about hubris. And he said, let's make better wings.
If one day there's a final history written of the motion picture, when it disappears as an art form and is replaced by something else, the name of Kubrick will stand at the very top, very large, very prominent, very powerful, as one of the cinema's greatest innovators and artists.